to a Sunday evening supplemental edition of the OBX Waiver Report, where we are going to discuss an exciting technology breakthrough from the US Department of Energy. And this breakthrough is both a major advance for clean energy as a response to climate change and also for US national defense. And since at this point, under the Biden administration, the United States is a major force for democracy in the world, this breakthrough is a reason to celebrate both for climate progress and for US technology leadership in defense of global democracies. But before I get into it, I'd like to talk a little bit about coastal communities and our fragility to the rising climate crisis. So at present, sea level rise is already causing nuisance flooding and increasingly more powerful tropical cyclones and other storm systems that impact various regions of the world's coastlines. The more carbon that gets pumped into the atmosphere through fossil fuel burning, the worse these impacts become as glaciers melt and as the oceans thermally expand, and as more fuel is provided for storms in the form of warm ocean temperatures and evaporative convection, as well as potentials for a increase in extremes that also fuel storms. Under the guidelines by the scientific community, the recommendation for this century is to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And at present, there is a huge gap in those stated goals, the need for reducing emissions to meet those stated goals, and in present policies and actions by governments. It is worth noting, though, that global emissions are on or appear to be on a plateau and set to steadily decline through the 2030s. But what needs to happen through the 2020s and through the 2030s is a rapid decline in global emissions. So understanding this gap is very important to also understanding the context of any new breakthrough so that we don't get complacent or overly optimistic as we face the climate crisis and as we resolve ourselves to act well. And I'm going to come back to this graph here and the discussion of climate action after we go into this major breakthrough, which is worth celebrating. So according to recent reports from the US Department of Energy, the National Ignition Laboratory achieved a fusion ignition using a large laser aimed at a hydrogen target that provided energy to that hydrogen target enough to fuse the atoms and create an energy producing chain reaction that produced 2.5 times the amount of energy that was used to fire the laser. So the laser used a certain amount of energy to fire into this hydrogen target. And then when the hydrogen target fused in a fusion reaction, it created 2.5 times more energy that was captured by the facility. And so the energy return on energy investment through this process was 2.5 times. This might sound really good, but for an energy system to be viable for modern societies, you tend to want an energy return on energy investment in the range of, I guess, about 8 to 15 or even more. And the more energy return you get on energy investment, the more economical it becomes and the more easy it is to use in the present high technology society that we live in today. But this breakthrough is major in that it does appear to pave a pathway for viability for hydrogen fusion reactions as a means of developing energy as the laser technology is refined and becomes more accurate. And as the energy collection systems become more capable. Um, so this breakthrough is major in that we have never achieved a net positive reaction for hydrogen fusion. And so oftentimes hydrogen fusion has been referred to as the thing that's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 decades. And that's been the case for the past 4 to 5 decades. So it's kind of been one of those things that just keeps getting pushed on and on into time and hasn't really been seen as a viable solution to human caused climate change. Now, according to the press release from the DOE and the experts who are in charge of the National Ignition Laboratory work on fusion, it is possible that these systems could reach commercial viability by the 2040s. And that's very important. That's a very important landmark for the context of protecting our coastal communities from climate crisis, because if these technologies are not reaching commercial viability until 2040, for example, then the question arises, what happens in the meantime? Because right now we have a need to rapidly scale clean energy. And I'm asking that question rhetorically now. We're kind of going to answer that. There's a few possible methodologies for how we can manage still accelerating the energy transition while also incorporating potentially future viable technologies like this exciting breakthrough in hydrogen fusion. And as we talk about that I want to highlight existing methods for reducing carbon emissions globally and what we're relying on now. So what we're relying on now is a combination of primarily wind and solar energy for baseload energy generation. And one of the nice things about wind and solar energy is that they are low cost and they're modular in their deployment. So you can, either buy a lot of wind and a lot of solar all at once, or you can buy it a little bit at a time, depending on your budget or your investment strategy. And this makes both wind and solar very attractive as an investment option because it's easy to scale, and also because wind and solar are based on mass production chains. Then they also benefit from economies of scale and iterative and breakthroughs in technology. For winds, it's turbine technology and generally like the size of the blade, and for solar, it's breakthroughs in either silicon-based solar or other forms of solar like perovskite that help to increase the efficiency of the solar cell, as well as the manufacturing process to help to reduce the cost of production over time. And right now, these energy sources are both economically viable and scalable as methods for rapidly reducing global emissions of carbon by replacing both gas and coal as energy generation sources, as well as oil as energy generation sources. Now, the link that has been helping to scale these technologies at present and to transfer them to the broader energy system is batteries. And what we have seen is a massive increase in the availability and potential of batteries, limited by certain materials like rare earths and certain metallic substances, but flexibilities in battery chemistry have also allowed for more production of batteries beyond what the limits for rare earths might initially seem to imply. So what we've seen is a mass increase in the production of batteries and in clean energy. And this increase is right now helping to reduce the increase in fossil fuel emissions, but it's not yet pushing the curve of carbon emissions down. And that's where we need to get, that we need to get to the point where we're replacing fossil fuel based energy sources at a fast enough rate that we bend down that curve of emissions so that we can hit that target of 1.5 degrees Celsius or less warming this century to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change and save as many of those precious coastal communities as possible. And so going back to our chart here, what do we need to do in the interim? So let's talk a little bit about fusion and let's talk about the interim. Since we have wind and solar and batteries and electric vehicles as viable technologies, is my opinion that the best strategy right now would be to mass deploy solar, wind, and batteries as rapidly as possible, and then to strategically plan for integrating fusion, this ignition-based fusion as a base load capacity to replace the needed base load plants. And so we would probably need a mix of battery storage in the interim time frame between now and 2040, and then looking toward potentially replacing the other baseload plants, such as the natural gas plants that we're keeping around in the post 2040 timeframe. So what we would want to do is integrate fusion, if it is planned to be viable, into that system, while also providing for um, the event that these fusion systems do not become viable in the necessary time frame. What we would also hopefully do is look to accelerate the commercialization and viability horizon for ignition-based hydrogen to help to bring forward that time when we have hydrogen-based baseload energy. So the reason why we need to plan for batteries is because wind and solar are both variable sources of energy. The solar collection occurs when the sun is shining, the wind collection occurs when the wind is blowing, and oftentimes you'll need storage to mine the gap in those times when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. Now, as grids interconnect clean energy, the gap becomes less and less, and as the grids become smarter, the gap becomes less and less. So if we have an integrated strategy that includes the traditional clean energy sources like wind, solar, batteries, smart grids, and an accelerated fusion technology as well coming in to help replace your baseload generators in the, say, 2040 or even mid 2030s to 2050s timeframe. And if that technology can become economically viable, then you have what is starting to look like an extraordinarily powerful strategy for rapidly reducing carbon emissions through the middle of this century and getting to zero carbon emissions globally or net negative as rapidly as possible. In addition, if we in the United States work hard to develop the manufacturing for such systems here, we can help continue to ensure a greater and greater energy security for the United States and to help support the world's energy security and the world's democracies, such as those democracies in Europe right now who are being held in a kind of harmful energy relationship right now with Russia as Russia invades Ukraine and seeks to crush the democracy in Ukraine. So this is a supplement for the OBX Wave Report, a much more serious discussion in some cases. I know I get kind of serious sometimes, but a bit more serious and technical discussion than we typically broach. But considering the importance of this particular breakthrough, I thought it would be helpful to provide some context because I often talk about doing everything we can to defend coastal communities. And right now, the tip of that spear is working to help push the clean energy transition as rapidly as possible so we can get down on this kind of curve here of emissions reduction to protect our coastal communities rather than languishing on a plateau where we're going to see worse and worse impacts or even backsliding into a worsening situation of increased emissions. So worth noting right now that according to the climate tracker, the climate action tracker, we're about in the range of around 2.5 to 2.8 degrees Celsius warming for this century, which is considerably better than where we were, like say back in the early 2010s as far as our pathway was. But we're still not on the pathway where we need to be. And considering that we have this wonderful potential breakthrough in fusion, um, it's worth reassessing where we are. It's worth reassessing our continued urgency to act, and it's worth looking at potentially how to integrate these new breakthroughs in as we continue to act urgently. But it's also worth noting that just because there's a breakthrough and a new technology is available, we don't languish and we don't become complacent thinking that this new technology is some kind of silver bullet. That said, this is a big deal, and all kudos and congratulations go to those hardworking scientists at the national laboratories who have produced this breakthrough, and much hope to them for their continued success and for the United States as a whole in successfully integrating this technology into a larger clean energy ecosystem that continues to accelerate our climate action, continues to push us forward as a global leader for climate action, and continues to help us defend democracies around the world from aggressors and terrorist states, from dictators and from kleptocrats and from bad actor oligarchs who seek only their own personal interest and not the interest of we the people or those who are potentially at risk of harms due to various bad actors. So thank you for joining me again for this exciting, if more serious episode of the OBX Wave Report, and we'll get back to some wave observations tomorrow morning.